I think that, what we have is, we have the guideline. Now, in the Hindu faith, I think it's chapter 10, verse 1.64.46, I believe. It gives us the guidelines. We are born with a brain, so we have to apply the verses within the guidelines.
You're absolutely right.
Raviji, sorry, could you speak up a bit? Our listeners won't be able to hear you. Is that okay?
So basically,
Thank you.
we're basically, as individual human beings, we're born with a brain.
Yeah.
So basically, we're there to exercise that brain in terms of what the verse is saying. There are guidelines. So if someone says, like the example you're saying, that's not within the guidelines, so that part is a completely different path. It's outside the guidelines.
Okay, so in fact, those guidelines would say that path is not leading a person to divinity, and hence all paths are not uniformly balanced.
Within the humanity of those paths, then we will reach the same path. But if someone wants to go to a completely different end point, then that's something else. But if somebody wants to go to God, they can choose their route. Whether they go by road A, B, or C, that's their choice. But they want to go to God. If somebody wants to go somewhere else, that's up to them then.
Yeah, absolutely. But do you happily agree then that a person's individual path is actually their divinely given right for them to choose and to walk on, but there's something not quite so right about imposing a path on a person?
That's correct. I don't agree with imposing, because someone internally has to, only they know what they are for themselves. We're all individuals. If I were to ask you 100 questions, we may get 98 right, but there's 2 going to be wrong, because we're all individuals. So we can't really, we're not all 100% the same. It's not the same as our parents, our brothers or sisters, as we all know.
Definitely.
Sure, and I think freedom to be individual is such an important thing in choices, isn't it?
That's right, yes. But also, can I just add that sometimes I've heard that some people, like when I was growing up, I was born into Hindu family, but then I turned agnostic because I wasn't sure about this caste business. But then I came back to Hinduism and I realized there's no caste system in the scriptures.
Absolutely right.
Nirvana is by choice. The Purusha Sutta talks of all the limbs working in harmony.
Yeah.
So it's like a metaphor for all the functions in society working together. For example, in the office, you got the high-level manager, the middle manager, the clerical staff, and the cleaner.
Yeah.
The cleaner is just as important as the other staff in terms of the functioning of it.
Raviji, where were you last week when we had this absolutely phenomenal conversation on the caste, the history of the caste system and how it was imposed?
I just found out from Prerna. I followed her, but I got a tweet. I think I saw a Twitter late.
Okay, great.
So therefore, I sent her some information as to about this caste debate.
Thank you very much.
That's where we're coming from, really.
Yeah, no, that's wonderful. And I think it's coming through as a common thread in almost all of the conversations we've been having. And it's just been reinforced again by Raviji. Thank you so much for contributing that. And that common thread is that a person's freedom to choose, and also to change that choice at a later point if they want to change it, is something that's sacrosanct. And when that's abused, there is a sense of something inappropriate and unpleasant at work here.
Definitely. Ravi, thank you very much for your call.
Thank you.
Bye.
So, we were just talking about the situation in Pakistan where dramatically numbers seems to have shifted, the demographics seems to have shifted. And I think there has been a United Nations report that the demographics in Bangladesh have also shifted as well.
Yes, they have.
It's obviously not just a coincidence, but it is a particular type of mindset, a social structure which is at work here. This is an unnatural shift in demographics. And in a world where divinity obviously loves diversity, right? We've got over 6 billion people on the planet, and not one of them is identical to another one. So there is something telling us, guys, it's okay to be different. Is this against the nature, and is this against the course of humanity?
Well, okay, just to play devil's advocate for a bit,
Okay.
let me try to argue the opposite point of view.
Great.
Now, if you're convinced something is right, and everyone is doing something else wrong, surely you'd feel obliged to at least help. Help other people realize what you're, the right thing to do, right? Yeah. And so you can kind of understand, I guess, in certain situations why people might want to convert.
Why people might want to convert other people?
Yeah, other people, right?
Yep,
because, they might just be doing it from, the idea of helping someone out realize, helping someone realize something that they've already realized themselves. Now, sure, I can accept that in most situations the person hasn't realized themselves, and it's more of a, join our gang.
An element of coercion involved and peer group pressure.
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
But you can understand how it might be justifiable if, say, the person actually was right.
Well, that's a really interesting element to introduce. And proselytization to encourage conversion is again something which is very present in certain mindsets, isn't it? But in Hinduism, it's not there. proselytization, excuse me, isn't looked favourably upon in the Hindu traditions at all.
It's not, but I can understand where Vivek's coming from, because I'm a vegetarian. I can find myself when I talk to people, because I believe so strongly in it, I kind of can't help myself but tell them how good vegetarianism is. And you can understand that if someone is really strong in their beliefs and their religious beliefs, they'd want to help other people see the light, so to say. If they've seen the light, they want everyone else to share in it. And if they found happiness and peace and God, they'd want to help their friends and families see that too. So I can understand why some people think conversion isn't bad, because if someone's found something, they want everyone else to experience that too.
It's a wonderful thought I've just recalled. Once upon a time, Swami Vivekananda had a conversation with Max Muller. Max Muller is the chap who's given the credit for doing the first translation of the Vedas and everything else. And when he started off his study of India and Hinduism, he was he was a covert agent, determined to try and manipulate and misrepresent the information that he was discovering.
Well, I've heard about it. He tried to manipulate the Sanskrit language.
Oh, he did so much. But what people don't really know is that towards the end of his life, he was retired, he was in Oxford, and Swami Vivekananda actually went to meet him there. And they were having a conversation on proselytization for the purposes of conversion. And Max Muller, the chap who'd been attacking Hinduism for all these years, he said he'd come to learn that Hinduism is treated by Hindus as though it was their mother. He said, and one doesn't go around broadcasting one's mother's beauty, right? He said, that's what people do. He said, that's what people do, and his language was very strong. He said, with prostitutes, he said, and Hindus do not treat their dharam as a prostitute to be displayed and portrayed. The way they approach it is that the best example that they could possibly give is by being the best son or daughter of their mother, and that would speak volumes for the thought processes and the culture and the religion that had given rise and created them and taught them. Whereas, and that's a totally different attitude to the attitude which says, we're the best and we've got to go around to everybody and tell them we're the best, and we have to make them become like us.
So pimping out their religion, so to speak, using that analogy.
I was a bit wary about introducing that analogy. Let's just pull this back into Manchester United, Manchester City.
If it's true though, because if something is really good and really wonderful, it speaks for itself. You don't have to say, oh, my religion's amazing, we do this, we do that, come and join us, because it speaks for itself. People can see how good it is. They don't have to be influenced by you or be persuaded or preached to, because it's already there.
I think this is probably true, isn't it? A person becomes a product of their culture. The way a person behaves, the way a person speaks, how welcoming they are, how supportive they are, that really tells you what the culture is behind this particular individual. And if that's the case, is there a need? Would that sort of a person go around proselytizing? Would that sort of a person actually have it as his agenda to convert more people into this harvest of souls that's been talked about in the Christian traditions?
I don't know. I mean, I think it's got to do with what they actually believe in, right? I mean, if you think that by saving all these souls, you're actually doing a good thing, and you are certain that that was the right thing to do, then yeah, you probably still would. But I can easily see someone who was so sure about him doing the right thing and the validity of his own view, they wouldn't feel the need to enter into any debate, any conversation at all. Yeah.
We've got a text from Mahinda in Ilford, and he said, is sharing different to conversion, in the sense that, you're sharing your experiences, you're sharing your belief? Is that different to converting someone?
I think you touched on this earlier, Satish. You were saying, how in religious interfaith dialogue, is it possible to talk to people when they're eyeing you up as a target? Can you actually talk to these people? Or is there always an agenda at work?
Yeah, and right now this is actually a conversation that's going on between the Hindu community and Hindu religious figures and the Christian community and Christian religious leaders, where the whole dialogue has been taken to that space. Is it actually possible to even have a dialogue when one party is behaving in one particular manner, which is very friendly and forthcoming, and saying, yes, let's sit around a table and have a dialogue, but really their stated position to their own flock is, we need to get more of these people as part of our flock? Is it possible to engage in a loving, friendly dialogue and coexist with respect and tolerance in that scenario?
I think historically it's a very tricky situation, because historically the Christian missionaries did come to India under Francis Xavier and various other the Portuguese rulers. So there is always a bit of, underlying mistrust, because the Christian missionaries did come to India. They did convert lots of Hindus, and as you were saying, even today the dialogue, it will always be viewed with suspicion because of what's going on in India.
Yeah, this is true. If any of our listeners out there wants to really dive deeply into some of the realities of the conversion process, so just go to Google and do a Google on papal pear, P-A-P-A-L, pear, P-E-A-R, and that will introduce conversion by a totally incredible and unbelievable means. But just bringing it back to being reasonable again. So we've already covered a couple of ideas that conversion in itself, change, one person choosing to change and go along a different path, there doesn't seem to be anything wrong with that. They will learn from their experiences and hopefully evolve as an individual, and that's their individual and human right to do that. But there is a sense that when somebody's doing it for external purposes, for ulterior motives, that's not quite right.
We've just got a text from Seema from Seven Kings. She said, I'm not sure why people need to be part of a group. Why can't we just be individual in the 21st century? So that's touching upon what we were talking about earlier, that it's a sense of community and belonging. And
Seema, thank you so much for that text. So the text, Prerna, would you just like to read that out again so our listeners can hear it again?
I'm not sure why people need to be part of a group. Why can't we just be individual in this 21st century?
Okay, phenomenal.
I'm not sure. I don't know. Do you think there is something about the way we are as people that makes us want to be in communities and groups? Because it seems like a very human thing. You know, you said about school playgrounds. It's something you do as a kid. You always want a group of friends. Even when you grow up, you have a group of colleagues who you go out with, who you socialise with. It seems to be a very human thing. I'm not entirely sure if is it natural to be...
I think, as they say, no man's an island.
Yeah, but having said that, right, in the Hindu tradition, it's not uncommon to think of a person who's religiously and spiritually evolved as isolating themselves from society and going
That's very
and
true.
sitting in a cave because they want to pursue their own deeply individual and personal experience of divinity. So maybe Seemaji's not wrong by any means in what she has said.
Yeah, I don't think Seemaji is actually wrong outright. I think you can be individual completely, mentally. I mean, even if you hang around with a different group of people, I think you can be doing your thing. I think there's nothing wrong with being yourself, but with loads of other people. So I think that's where the balance is.
All right, just a quick reminder, you're tuned into a reasonable conversation on Nusound Radio 92 FM, and we're drawing towards the end of the show, but I think it'd be useful to touch on next week's subject as well. The subject that we're going to be speaking on next week, Prerna or Vivek, do you have...
Yeah, I mean, we've had a lot of texts coming in recently about topics people have suggested, and one which we thought would be very interesting would be, is Britain a secular society?
Fantastic.
I think there's a lot to say about that, and a lot to hear about that as well.
Definitely. Bernard touched on it earlier, talking about the UK, how we're living, there's a multitude of different faiths living here. But at the same time, we're supposed to be secular. So is that happening? Is it not happening?
So is the reality and the substance, are they two different things? On the surface, are we a secular society? And perhaps underneath, maybe we're not so secular. What a fantastic choice for a conversation, a reasonable conversation.
Definitely. If you want to text through and give your views in advance, the number's 07961 387 787. And you can even email us on info@newsoundradio.com. So do give us your thoughts in advance and we'll take it on board for next week.
So today we've been talking about conversion and trying to use reason to explore this idea, which is very sensitive and obviously touches a lot of people very, very deeply. And I think what we've come to is that the freedom of an individual to pick their own path is sacrosanct. And there's nothing wrong with sharing your information and your beliefs and your ideas and your history and your journey, but so long as it's done honestly and without a motive. I think it's the motive that when it touches people, it then creates a cascade of historical fears and worry of loss of relationships and manipulation and exploitation, and all of those things seem to be what really is ringing alarm bells when we think of conversion.
No, definitely. I think if it is an individual choice and the individual is well informed in a place of non-vulnerability and is able to make that informed choice of changing religion or changing beliefs, then it's up to them. And, you know, if they're happy doing what they want to do, then we should, you know, let them get on with it. But it's only when they've been manipulated and there's other kind of things playing on them, it's not good.
So freedom of choice and freedom to change choice afterwards. These are what make a reasonable conversation. Thank you so much for listening in, and we hope you'll join us on Nusound Radio 92 FM next week to explore the ideas behind...
Is Britain a secular society? And like we said earlier, if you do have any ideas for interesting topics that you might want us to talk about, feel free to text in. And if you've got a topic in the future that you do want to discuss, text us on 07961 387787.
Thank you for listening, goodbye, and enjoy the rest of your weekend.